Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Chronicles, that is Divrei Hayomim Bet. We are up to chapter 16, and we have been reading the last several chapters of the life and career of Melech Asa, King Asa, who was, let me think, since he was the son of Aviyam, the son of Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, the son of David. So that would make him the king number 5 of the house of David. Now, until now, King Asa has been exemplary in his behavior, and he seems to have been faithful to God, and thus, because of his reliance upon God and God alone, he turned the people away from idol worship and eventually and he was able to overcome a major difficulty when he was attacked by an Egyptian attack force, a huge Egyptian attack force led by Zerach Hakushi, the Cushite named Zerach. However, in today's chapter, we are going to learn of the mistake that Asa made. And I always, when I see of the mistake and the failure of Asa, which we are about to read about in today's chapter, I always like to look back before and see if we can find little hints as to why, what were the tiny little flaws, hints as to what exactly was the flaw, the little flaws that eventually led to the big mistake that he's about to make. And the only glaring criticism that that the chronicler writes previously of Asa, even while he's in general very much glowingly praising Asa and his behavior, is the fact that he still allowed the bamot, he still allowed the alternate places of worship throughout the land of Judah, that were, even though he was supposed to guide them only to worship at the temple itself in Jerusalem. So that little chink in his armor eventually led to Asa looking to other places for support. I'm not 100% satisfied by this, and I'm open to other people's observations, of course, if others have deeper observations than this. But that's the only thing I could think of right now. But let's read about his mistake, and maybe we can come up with even better understandings. Bishnas Shiloshim V'Sheish L'Malchut Asa, during the 36th year of the kingdom of the reign of Asa. So remember, this is a good amount of years, about 30 years, 25, 30 years or so of peace, right? Allah Basha Melech Israel, right? Basha, who was at the time now the king of Israel. We haven't really been focusing in the book of Chronicles. When we learned this history in the book of Kings, it would flip back and forth, the parallel history of Judah and the parallel history of the kings of Israel. The kings of Israel so far here in the book of Chronicles just kind of pop up every once in a while, but we haven't really been following their history in depth. We've been focusing only on Judah. But so by this time, the king of Israel was Basha, and Basha came up against and attacked Yehuda. Now, we know that Judah and Israel have been fighting back and forth. We saw in the previous chapters that Asa had taken some border towns from Ephraim, and many people from the northern tribes actually integrated themselves into Judah. So we saw that. So there was a fluidity here of, to some degree, some sort of peaceful interchange, and also fighting back and forth, of conquering back and forth. But so now, apparently, at this point, this fighting reached a point where it was at the verge of all-out war. Now, we have seen already there were times when it broke out in all-out war, but over here we're at the verge of that happening again. And Basha, in order to protect his northern kingdom, by even at Ramah, he built up the Ramah place, a high place, Levilti Tate Yotzei Vava Asa Melech Yehuda, so that Asa could no longer raid into his territory of Israel, so that blocked him off. So, and this also severely impinged on the movement of Asa and Kingdom of Judah, and this was an intolerable situation for the southern kingdom of Judah, and it was a very bold and big move by Baasha, the king of Israel. So, in order to respond, what did Asa do to respond? Vayotze Asa kesef zahav. Asa took out silver and gold me'otzrot beit Adonai beit Hamelach. So he took from I see in some of the translations it says he took out all of the kesef zahav, but it doesn't say all here. It says he took gold and silver. It seems that he took some gold and silver from the although tradition may have it explained differently, but he took some of the silver and gold from the uh, storehouses of the temple and from the storehouses of the king's own treasury. Vayishlach el Ben Hadad melech Aram, and he sent it to Ben Hadad, who was the king of Aram. At this time, this was prior to the ascent of the Assyrian kingdom, which was going to happen a few generations later, and they're going to loom large on the scene. And prior to that, the region of Mesopotamia and the areas of Israel and Judah were really ruled by smaller city states, but one of the more powerful ones was Aram, roughly located where modern Syria is today. And the Ben Hadad, the king of the Aramean kingdom, Hayoshev Bidar Mesek, living in Damascus, Lamar saying as follows. So he sent a message to Ben Hadad. Now Ben Hadad is mostly Aram is mostly fighting with Israel, the northern kingdom. Well, the geographic juxtaposition would make that make sense. But they were also an enemy here and there for Judah, and they're generally enemies. But every once in a while, they would sign treaties with this one or that one or the other one for various reasons. We've seen this throughout the book of Kings and somewhat in Judges as well. So bris beini uveinecha, and he says to him, there is a bris, a covenant between I and you. In other words, a personal one between us as kings. Uvein avi uvein avichan, between my father and your father. Hine shalachti l'cha kesef ezav. Here I'm sending you a gift of gold and silver. Lech hafer brischa, break your alliance as Baasha Melech Yisrael, hinting that there was an alliance between Aram and Baasha, which obviously strengthened the northern kingdom. And by paying him off, he hoped to attain an alliance with Aram via Alem Me'alai, and he will stop bothering me, and he will leave me, and he will stop pressuring me and abandon this fortress that he just built, which is facing my kingdom and hurting my kingdom. So, the key thing here is we don't see anything about Vayelech Lidrosh es Hashem. He did not even go to Doresh. Remember, the key word in Chronicles is Doresh, and I've been translating it and I've demonstrated through the verses that Doresh means search out, seek out from God what I should do, what my course of action should be. In other words, so that I choose the correct action, the action that will lead to the right outcome. Now, signing an alliance may or may not have been the right pact. Paying off, getting rid and emptying the temple treasury, it may be in desperate measures something that's okay to do. But Asa didn't even bother asking, right? He didn't go to the prophet. It seems that the prophet Azaryahu was not the primary one on the scene. There's another prophet, Hanani, who we'll learn about in just a minute. He should have went to Hanani, consulted and discussed. And if we recall, this is something we remember from the books of Isaiah and the book of Kings. The mistake that Achaz made. This is later down in history at the time of Isaiah, who went to the Assyrians in order to protect himself from the alliance that was arrayed against him. And that what that led to was bringing into his kingdom of Judah all of the abominable practices and pagan practices of the nation of Syria. When you make the alliance of Assyria at the time, when you make an alliance with someone, it's not just a political alliance, but it brings social and religious interaction, which can corrupt the entire idea and ideal of the purpose of this of Israel. The purpose of Israel is to demonstrate that that we're not just about paying each other off and you scratch my back and I scratch your back and we'll defend each other, but there's a moral and ethical idea that we're living for, right? Our God is not just the God we go to when we need something from him because we're in dire straits. The God is the God that we worship because he's the creator of the world, and our purpose in existence is in order to fulfill the purpose of being his creation and living in the way that he commanded us to live and demonstrating that for the entire world and thus bringing about peace, which is what we saw in the last chapter as the uh, as the prophet Azariah told us very clearly and so beautifully. This would have been an opportunity for Asa to show when I'm under the gun, literally, right? I search, I seek God. I am doresh God. I seek out God to find what the proper path should be. So what happened? Vayishma ben Hadad and Melech Asa. Ben Hadad, he took the bribe and he was bribed. So he listened. He took the request of the king Asa. Vayishlach et soreach hayalim ashalo el Israel, and he sent the his officers, his commanders to the cities of Israel, Vayaku at Iyon Vietan, and he struck down the towns of Iyon and towns in the territory of Dan, the tribe of Dan, one of the northern tribes, Beit Avel Mayim, and a place called Avel Mayim. The eight Kol Miskanos Naphtali, and all of the garrison towns or the towns where they had stored military equipment in the tribe of Naphtali. So he went. In other words, he went ahead and attacked the northern tribes in solidarity with the southern kingdom. So he broke the agreement that he had with Basha, and he honored the request of King Asa. So it worked. His trick, not all that trick, but his strategy worked. Basha. When Basha heard that he was being attacked by Aram and he lost his most important ally, and he realized that this was at the request of Judah, he stopped building up the fortress at Ramah, and he completely stopped his work, which was everything that he was doing to build up his strength against Yehuda. So he ceased to be a threat to Judah, to the southern kingdom, the King Asa. So Asa Hamelech. So Asa now successful in his attempt here. Lokach et kol Yehuda. He took all of the people of Yehuda. It seems like he got everyone together. Vayisu et avnei Ramah, and he took down the stones which were used to build up Basha's fortress, and it is now under control of Yehuda. And the wood that was used to build the fortress, Asher Bana Basha, that Basha had built. Even by him, and he used it to build up his own towns at Geva at Mitzpah, the towns of Geva and Mitzpah. So now it seems like Asa was successful. But let's see. Does God think this is successful? Does God think that what Asa did was the right thing? So Va'isahi, and at this time, Chanani Haroeh, Chanani the seer. So we have another prophet named Chanani. This is about 25, 30 years later, so presume maybe Azariah had passed on, and now Hanani had taken over as the primary leader of the prophet. El Asa Melech Yehuda, he came to Asa, the king of Yehuda, and as is the role of the prophets, always to speak truth to power, to speak the word of God to power. Vayomer Elav, right? And he said to him, Bihisha encha al melech Aram, because you relied in your heart. Where did you rely? Where did you seek strength? You sought strength and reliance on the king of Aram. Below nishanta al Adonai Elohecha, but you did not seek strength and reliance on the Lord your God, on God. Al kain nimlat chel melech Aram miyadecha. For this reason, the army of the king of Aram will slip from your hands. In other words, you think you bought them, you think you control them. I'm sorry, but that's not going to work. And this is true on so many levels. When you buy an ally with money and then the money runs out, or someone else pays him more, then you're gone. The lesson here is so clear and so obvious. If it's just a deal, I pay you, you pay me, I gain this, you gain that, then the moment you have nothing to gain, the moment you have no cards in your hand, is the moment you lose all of your allies. However, if what you are looking at is a commitment to an ideal, to a principle, to a value, to something that's important, which the Torah is trying to teach us, which the chronicler is trying to remind us, is reliance upon God, reliance upon on justice, reliance upon the way we're supposed to live our lives and fulfill our purpose in this world. If that is and that will never go away. God will never leave. God is not someone who gets bought and sold like Aram and other fair weather allies are. And then Hanani points out to Asa halahu Kushim vihalubim, the Kushites and the Libyans, right? Remember the Libyans and the Kushites at the time were part of the Egyptian Empire. They were subsumed under the Egyptian Empire, and at this time in history, the king of Egypt, the pharaoh of Egypt, was the Libyan. It would have been Osarkon or his son, or one of those descendants of Sheshank. We talked about Sheshank. We talked about this a couple chapters ago. But anyway, so the Kushites and the Lubites, they had the massive army. They were described as 1,000,000 foot soldiers, and they had so many, many, many horses and riders and chariots. And when you relied upon God alone, He put them under your hand. In other words, you beat them because you stood fast and you stood fast with God. God's eyes look everywhere. This is an interesting language here. He doesn't say because God is strong and God will stand with you and God will support you, but he says because God knows everything that's going on. And it would seem that in within this verse lies a little bit of a kernel of understanding the mistake that Asa had made. It's like Asa had still had a little chink in his heart that didn't truly believe that God was actually in control of everything. He still thought that there must be there's ways around, right? And therefore he was scared and afraid and turned to the king of Aram, right? Um, but here Hanani is telling him this lesson. No, God's eyes look everywhere. Lehitchazek im levavam shalem elav, right? In order to be strong and to strengthen those for whom their hearts are with God completely, right? Those that recognize and realize that God is truly in control of everything. Niskalta alzos, you were foolish. In other words, you made a foolish mistake. A foolish mistake. That's an interesting language, not an evil mistake, not a selfish mistake, but a foolish mistake. Because you should have known better. Now you've had peace all of this time because you relied on God alone. Now that you're relying on alliances and paying off people, you're going to be beset by wars for the rest of the time. And now Asa almost, you can say, shows his true colors. But he's been so good until now. But now we see this chapter. Now he's not so good anymore, right? Asa gets angry at the seer, get angry at the messenger. This is the key mistake. Instead of saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Now I see what I did wrong. What can I do to improve?" This should have been his response to the Navi. Maybe there's some salvation. We see this mistake happen over and over again. We see this again and again when King Saul is confronted with his mistake, it's not, I did something wrong, I'm sorry, what can I do to fix it? But denial, deflection, anger. So Asa gets angry at the messenger Vayetneo Beis HaMa'apeches, and he puts him in the Beis HaMa'apeches, that is the house of the, literally would sound of turning things upside down. It's some sort of a torture chamber or prison chamber. I see it translated in some places in the stocks. Kivazafi moalzos, because he was in a tremendous amount of anger. He was zaf is like anger on steroids. He was furious. I see in some of the translations, but regarding this message by Yirat Seitz Asam min Amba Isai. And remember, Asa was even more furious because in his mind he's thinking, I was successful. I did the right thing. But Hanani is saying, no, you have to look further than just today. Yeah, today you paid him off and he helped you. Tomorrow it won't be so good. So and at that time, what did Asa then become? He then became cruel against the people of the nation. Asa went and became a cruel king. The connection, and I don't. It's so important to notice this connection. It's put there for a very important reason. This isn't just a political, advice column telling you, not to rely on alliances that are dependent upon money and things like that. Yes, it's important to know, but it's a moral lesson because what happens when you don't, when you think that your kingdom is something that you're going to secure by paying off the right people and convincing the right people, as opposed to a kingdom which stands for a principle, for an idea, for something that's more important than who happens to be the king, than who's the powerful one, who's the rich one. Then what happens is you become a cruel tyrant. The leadership, the government becomes cruel. The government starts turning against people, starts doing things that hurt the population because that is what happens, right? But if you recognize that the purpose of the king is to rule justly, then one doesn't make such alliances, but more importantly, one treats the people of the nation better. So at this point, Asa reacts angrily and he unjustly imprisoned the the seer, the prophet. But by Asa Mina'am, then Asa became a cruel tyrant to the people as well, and he starts punishing and being cruel to his subjects. But at that time, Asa turned around from being this great king to being a tyrant. Mihine, and behold, Divrei Asa Harishonim V'Achronim. If you want to learn more about Asa, the history of his early days and his late days. Hinam ksuvim al sefer hamelachim liudav Yisrael. You can go ahead and read about them in the books of Chronicles about the kings of Judah and Israel. Vayechala Asa b'shnas shloshim v'teisha l'malchuso b'raglav. And Asa became very ill in his legs in the 39th year of his kingdom, of his reign. Ad lemalach al yo, and his illness became very great, or could also mean it went up very high. In other words, it spread from his legs up. V'gam b'chol yo lo dorash es Adonai. Even when he was ill, he did not seek out God. Now it doesn't say lo bikesh, right? He didn't pray. He may have prayed, but lo dorash. And the word dorash means he didn't look to God in order to seek advice of what to do, how to improve his kingdom. Now I'm suffering. Now I should realize what it feels like to suffer. Maybe I should let up on how cruel I am to my people. Maybe I should change the way I act. He didn't think this way. Ki for him. The only thing he paid attention to was the doctors, but he didn't improve his behavior. He didn't improve who he was because he was not Doresh Hashem. He did not seek out God to determine the best course of action. Rather, he only asked doctors. He passed on. Literally translates to he laid with his fathers. So from year 39 to 41, he was sick. And in year 41, he passed away of his reign. And they buried him in the grave that he had dug for himself, Asher Karlo Be'ir David, that he had dug in the city of David. and laid him to rest in the resting place, which was full of spices and various kinds of spices, merukachim b'merkachas maaseh, which were prepared and ground and mixed by special experts, right? With special expertise, I mean, vayisapru lo sreifa gedola ad lamod, and a very great fire was made. This is a fire in which traditionally they burned the things that belonged to the king. And so on. But not necessarily everything, but there was this custom in honor of the king to burn them now that the king was gone. So this concludes the reign of Asa, so promising such a move in the right direction, and then a failure at the end. Unfortunately, a familiar story throughout our lives. We see this all the time, and a familiar story throughout the Bible, Tanakh. This concludes the reign of Asa. Thank you so much for studying chapter 16 together with me. Looking forward to studying chapter 17, where we will read about the reign of Asa's son, a very interesting reign, the reign of Yehoshaphat, the sixth king in the line of the house of David. And have a wonderful day.